we introduced the latency ratchet. So how does the latency ratchet, as described in this scenario, provide the foundation for long-range and even creative anticipation? Well, to see that, it's a question of looking more closely at the interplay of latency in this type of scenario. So these creatures, the ones hidden behind the boulders, whilst they can no longer see the quarry for themselves, they are still attached or bound to the choreography by latency. They don't immediately lose track of what they're doing. But let's just suppose for a moment that you saw one of them moving away from his boulder at a certain moment. That might be because some cue within the choreography prompted them to move for some reason, or it might be because the latency expired and the creature becomes released from it. Incidentally, we might wonder to what extent are the creatures volunteers in a choreography, or to what extent does the choreography lock them in place? Anyway, but meanwhile, the reception of cues from their fellow creature here, due to his disposition, maybe he moves around a bit looking at the quarry, his disposition, the reception of those cues is able to replenish the latency with respect to the overall choreography. And this will keep these other creatures, keep them within the choreography. And with that latency refreshed, for the overall choreography may be the sub-latency to do with crouching behind a boulder, that can also be refreshed, or it could be re-evaluated. So there's a kind of cascade of latencies and sub-latencies at different levels. So it's this particular refreshment of latency that is the key to the latency ratchet, because it extends the time period over which a particular focus is maintained. The focus on going after this quarry in this case. But it also extends what we might say the tenuosity of the choreography, or the attachment to the choreography. And for each creature, what this means is that the individuals are able to become less committed to a narrow range of short-term responses. Because at an earlier stage of evolution, each individual creature might just run after the quarry themselves, individually, just be committed to their own action. Being engaged in a choreography is a much more sophisticated thing that requires a certain amount of suppression of more narrow responses, but the benefit or the payoff of that, by suppressing that commitment to those narrow responses, gives a space in the evolutionary framework for the development of a wider repertoire of responses to situations, both in terms of a repertoire of scanning and detection responses, going to different places. Like if you're in a choreography, there's more value in spotting a quarry from a greater distance and then signalling that information to the others. Whereas if you're just all by yourself, that could be counterproductive, wasting your time, keeping away from things. And also, so the scanning and detection and extended responses with respect to responding to the quarry, setting out to catch it, to track it and to catch it. And therefore the possibility of more specialized roles that the creatures can assume. How does latency express itself? Within the cognitive machinery of each creature, there must be related timing mechanisms, clocks in other words, which are activated by cues and that continue to, the clock or timer continues for a certain length of time for the period of latency, and then it finishes, or it can be refreshed and keep it going. We said that latency is the momentum of interpretation when signals are interrupted, so that's why latency and these clocks are needed. The creatures are following cues, but cues are not always available. Cues that are significant come and go and have to be distinguished from the background. When a cue is interrupted and they are waiting, latency is still switched on, so waiting for further cues relative to what they're doing. What we can say is that latency keeps the cognitive machinery in a state of preparedness to detect further cues, a certain range of cues, relevant ones, and giving those cues salience or a sense of significance or importance. Latency can be thought of as an internal cue that provides a stepping stone for times when the external cues are not sufficient to keep the program going. So it's to do with linking up cues when there are gaps, maintaining a state of preparedness, and overall focus on a particular activity. So what does this give us? What it is increased amounts of cognitive machinery within each creature. Machinery that is then available for subsequent evolutionary development. On the other hand, the situation where we have described is still very much a real-time type of situation. There's nothing yet like planning, representation, or really long-range anticipation as yet. And so we're going to look at some further potential developments that are heading in that direction.